He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Why are you wearing lipstick at your age? You look ridiculous." I didn't cry. Not then. But something inside me cracked, like an old window giving way to a storm. My name is Evelyn Foster. I'm 63 years old, and up until 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a movie. Just in that quiet, slow way women fade into the background when no one looks at them anymore. When you open your closet and realize all your clothes are beige. When you start whispering in restaurants because you're afraid of sounding loud or annoying. I lived that way for 38 years. Married to a man who stopped seeing me after year 10. But I stayed. For the kids. For the routine. For the hope that maybe, just maybe, one day he'd notice me again. His name was Richard. Tall, proud. The kind of man who smiled more in photos than in real life. He used to hold my hand in the early days, back when I was young, glowing, full of dreams, and he still called me darling. But slowly, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. By the time I turned 50, he had a new nickname for me, Old Lady. He said it jokingly, at first, but over the years, the joke stopped being funny. He'd sigh when I asked him to join me for walks. He'd grimace when I bought a red dress. "Trying to be 25 again, Eve? Grow up." I started to believe him. I shrunk. In confidence, in voice, in joy. I gave up lipstick, stopped wearing perfume, cut my hair short. Not because I wanted to, but because he said long hair on old women looks desperate. But one morning, I don't know what came over me. I was walking past the drugstore and I saw a little display of lipsticks, bright colors, bold names. One shade was called Second Chance. It made me laugh, so I bought it. That night, I stood in front of my mirror. My hand trembled as I opened the cap. I hadn't worn red in 20 years. I painted my lips slowly, carefully, and for the first time in years, I saw her, the woman I used to be. Excited, I walked out into the living room. Richard was watching TV, half asleep in his recliner. I cleared my throat. He looked up, squinted, and then with the most dismissive smirk, he said, "You look like a clown," and went back to watching football. That moment, that small, cruel sentence. It wasn't just about lipstick. It was about every piece of me he'd chipped away over the years. And that night, while brushing my teeth, I didn't cry, but I promised myself something. I would find the woman I lost, even if it was the last thing I did. I didn't leave Richard that night. I wish I could say I was strong enough, brave enough. But years of silence make your bones heavy. It takes time to remember that you're allowed to walk away. Instead, I started small. I wore the lipstick again, not for him, but for me. I walked a little straighter in the grocery store. I signed up for a beginner yoga class at the community center, the kind where everyone is old enough to have grandkids, and no one cares if your knees crack. And one afternoon, something strange happened. A young man at the pharmacy smiled at me, not in a flirty way, just kindly, like I was visible. It made my chest hurt, because I hadn't felt seen in years. That night I made pasta, his favorite. I lit a candle, wore a soft scarf around my neck. Richard walked in late, didn't say hello, just glanced at the table and said, "What's the occasion?" I smiled. "Just wanted to have dinner together." He scoffed. "That's a lot of effort for spaghetti. Who are you trying to impress?" And just like that, the air went out of the room. I sat down across from him, hands folded. "Richard," I said softly, "do you still love me?" He looked up from his plate. "Why are you being dramatic?" I didn't respond. He put down his fork. "Look, Eve, we're old. Love isn't lipstick and candlelight. It's comfort. It's having someone to yell at when you lose the remote. That's what you get at our age. That's what you are." I felt my heart sink. That's what I am? A background character in my own life? I woke up early. stared at the mirror. My lipstick still sat there on the counter, next to my bottle of moisturizer and a pair of gold earrings I hadn't worn in decades. I put them on. Then I walked into our study, pulled out my journal, and started writing something I hadn't written in 38 years. My dreams. Travel to Italy. Take dance lessons. Open a little flower shop. Laugh until I cry. Fall in love again. For real this time. I stared at the last one. My heart trembled. Was it possible? At this age? But then I heard Richard snoring from the bedroom, and I whispered to myself, yes, it is. A few weeks later, I had a small fall in the garden, twisted my ankle on a loose stone. Richard didn't even notice. He was golfing that morning. So I drove myself to urgent care. That's when I met Dr. Adam Morgan. He was young, maybe late 30s, gentle, kind, the kind of man who speaks like he's actually listening. He examined my ankle, then looked at me and said, "Do you mind if I ask, are you okay?" I blinked. Physically? He smiled. Emotionally? I hesitated, then said quietly, "No, but I'm working on it." He nodded. "Good. It's never too late to start healing." That sentence stayed with me. That same week, I found my old sewing machine in the attic. I dusted it off, repaired a few stitches, and made myself a red dress, the kind I used to wear before marriage turned me invisible. I wore it to the grocery store on Saturday, and when I looked in the mirror in the cereal aisle, I didn't see a clown. I saw me, coming back to life. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything truly broke, the kind of day that's quiet, warm, deceptively peaceful. I had made fresh lemonade, baked scones from my grandmother's recipe. I was hoping, still hoping, that maybe we could talk like people again. Richard came into the kitchen, looked at the table, then looked at me. "You've been playing dress-up lately," he said, smirking. "Trying to feel young?" I stayed silent. He took a scone, bit into it, and added, "You know, Eve, women like you should be happy someone married them at all. At this age, you're not exactly a catch." That was it. Not the lipstick, not the dinners, not the silence, but that sentence, cruel and casual, cracked something wide open inside me. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who once kissed my nose when I had a cold, this man who promised forever under the rain. He was gone. Or maybe he'd never really been there at all. I stood up. My voice was steady. "I'm filing for divorce." He laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't last a day alone." I didn't respond. Instead, I went upstairs and packed a single bag. I moved into a small Airbnb down the road, a converted garage with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet. But peace. It was the first time in decades I had space to breathe. I cried the first night. Then I danced the second. I wore my red dress every morning, not because I needed to, but because I could. I saw Dr. Adam again during a follow-up for my ankle. He looked surprised to see me smiling. "You look different," he said. "I feel different," I replied. We talked for 20 minutes longer than necessary, about books, about life, about second chances. And when I left, I found myself hoping I'd see him again. Richard didn't believe me, not even when the papers arrived at his doorstep. He called me, yelling, demanding, accusing. "You're going through a phase," he said. "You'll come crawling back." I didn't answer. Instead, I sat in my little Airbnb with a cup of tea and watched the rain hit the window. I was free. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I joined a local gardening club, started teaching kids how to sew at the library on Tuesdays. I even booked a one-way flight to Italy, just for the summer. Every day I woke up a little more alive, and then one morning, while planting lavender in a public park garden, I heard someone say, "I never thought lavender suited anyone until now." I looked up. It was Dr. Adam. He was holding a cup of coffee in each hand. "I thought you might like this," he said, offering one. We sat on a bench, side by side, sipping in silence. Eventually, he turned to me and said, "You're not just healing, Evelyn. You're glowing." I smiled at Dr. Adam, warmth spreading across my chest like sunlight. It wasn't a flirtatious moment, not at first. It was something deeper, softer. The feeling of being seen not as an obligation, but as a person. We started meeting every Sunday after that, sometimes at the park, sometimes at the local cafe where the tables wobbled and the waitress always forgot your order. But the conversations were perfect. He never treated me like I was too old or past my prime. He asked about my dreams, my childhood, my fears. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole heart. One day I told him I used to dance. "Used to?" he asked with a grin. "Then let's fix that." That evening we danced barefoot on the wooden floors of his porch. No music, just laughter, just the breeze. And when he held my hand, he held it like it mattered. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunder, no sweeping background score, just a quiet moment. We were sitting by the riverbank, watching ducks float by. I was telling him about the time I accidentally set the kitchen on fire while trying to bake a pie. He laughed, a full, warm belly laugh, and then his smile softened. "I don't know how to say this," he whispered, "but I look forward to every word you speak." I blinked, unsure. He leaned in gently and kissed me, slow, respectful, certain. My heart, oh my heart, it didn't feel 63. It felt 17 again. Brave, beautiful, alive. A month after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter. It was handwritten, which surprised me. Inside, Richard had scribbled, "I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I didn't think you could live without me, but it turns out I was the one who couldn't live without you." He ended it with, "If you ever want to come back, the door is open." I folded the letter slowly, placed it in a drawer I no longer opened, and smiled, because I wasn't going back. I wasn't the woman who begged for love anymore. I had found it, not in someone else, but in myself. And now, I was ready for more. It was a soft spring evening. The air smelled of lilacs and fresh earth. Dr. Adam and I had just finished dinner on his porch, grilled vegetables, crusty bread, and a bottle of wine that made us both giggle like teenagers. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the last golden light of the sun on my skin. "This is the happiest I've been in, I don't know, maybe forever," I said quietly. Adam looked at me, not with pity, not with politeness, but with awe, like I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He reached into his pocket, then paused. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. I nodded. I never believed in fate. I thought life was just random. But then you walked into my clinic with a sprained ankle and changed everything. I laughed. "My clumsiness changed your life?" He smiled. "No. Your strength did. Your fire. You remind me that healing isn't just for the young. It's for the willing." Then he pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. "Evelyn," he said, getting down on one knee, right there on the creaky porch. "Would you let me walk beside you for the rest of our days?" I stared at him, a younger man, a kind soul, asking a woman with wrinkles, scars, and a past full of pain to be loved, fully and truly. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." We didn't want a big wedding, no grand halls, no ice sculptures. We chose the park where we first shared coffee. I wore a simple cream dress with lace sleeves. Adam wore a gray suit with a wildflower boutonniere. There were only 30 people, friends, neighbors, a few of his colleagues. I walked down the path barefoot, holding a bouquet of lavender and daisies. As I reached him, he whispered, "You've never looked more radiant." I smiled. "Lipstick and all?" He grinned. especially the lipstick. We said our vows beneath a willow tree, and when he kissed me, the wind rustled the leaves like applause. A woman came up to me during the small reception. Her name was Linda. She had silver hair and soft eyes. "I watched you," she said, "at the library, at the garden club. You inspired me." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded. "You reminded me that it's never too late to start again. Thank you." That night, as Adam and I slow danced in our tiny living room, I rested my head on his chest. He whispered, "You've changed the way I see time. You've made growing older feel like a privilege, not a punishment." And for the first time in decades, I felt proud of my age, proud of every line on my face, proud of every scar that brought me to this moment. Our home was nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, chipped paint, creaky floors, a garden that bloomed wild and free, just like me. We filled it with books, music, plants, and laughter. We argued over silly things like which tea was better, chamomile or green. We shared quiet Sunday mornings, reading in bed with sunlight creeping across our toes. It was simple. It was real. And every day, it felt like a miracle. One morning, I pulled out the old journal I had written in back when I left Richard. The list of dreams. Travel to Italy. Take dance lessons. Open a flower shop. Laugh until I cry. Fall in love again. I smiled. 4 out of 5. Adam looked over my shoulder. "What's left?" I tapped the page. "The flower shop." He nodded thoughtfully. That weekend, he drove me to a little corner store in town. An old, closed-up florist shop with dusty windows and a faded sign. There was a "For Rent" sign on the door. I looked at him, startled. He said, "I called ahead. They're waiting for you." I opened Second Chance Blooms a month later, named after the lipstick shade that started it all. It was small, but magical. The walls were pastel green, shelves filled with sunflowers, roses, and forget-me-nots. A bell above the door chimed softly every time someone walked in. I spent my mornings arranging bouquets and my afternoons teaching local kids how to pot herbs. People came for flowers, but they stayed for stories. They'd say things like, "I wish I had your courage," or "I never thought someone could start over at your age." I always smiled and said, "Age doesn't close doors, fear does." One rainy Thursday, the bell over the shop door rang. I looked up and froze. It was Richard. He looked thinner, older, sadder. He walked slowly through the shop, eyes trailing across the vases and hanging plants. Finally, he stood in front of me and whispered, "You really did it." I nodded. "I did." He looked down. "I miss you." I stayed quiet. He added, "You were never too old. I was just too blind." I offered a small, kind smile. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, "but I don't miss who I was when I was with you." He left with empty hands. I stood behind the counter, heart steady, because closure doesn't always need pain. Sometimes it just needs peace. A year passed, then 2. Life unfolded like a gentle melody, full of small joys, unexpected beauty, and deep comfort. Adam and I traveled to Italy in the spring. We danced in a piazza under fairy lights. He held my hand as we tossed coins into the Trevi fountain. And as we watched gondolas float past in Venice, he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on life or on love." We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners in healing, healed by laughter, by kindness, by truth. One evening, I sat at my writing desk in the flower shop. The sky outside was blushing pink. I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote, "Dear Evelyn, you were never too old. You were never too late. You were just waiting for the right moment to bloom. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the first page of my old journal, next to the list of dreams. Then I added a sixth line. Inspire other women to bloom again. Because now, women came into my shop not just for flowers, but for hope. A widow who wanted to travel alone for the first time. A grandmother starting painting lessons at 70. A woman who filed for divorce after 30 years of silence. They shared their stories. I shared mine. And somewhere between the petals and the pots of soil, we all started growing together. On our second wedding anniversary, Adam took me to the same riverbank where we shared our first kiss. He brought a picnic blanket, a bottle of wine, and a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver locket. On one side, a photo of me in my red dress. On the other, the words, "Still glowing." I looked at him, eyes misty. He kissed my forehead and said, "You didn't just rewrite your story, Evelyn. You rewrote mine." We watched the sun set in silence. The sky turned to gold, and I felt more alive than I ever had in my youth. The older I grew, the lighter I felt. Funny, isn't it, how we spend our early years carrying the weight of other people's opinions, trying to be pleasing, quiet, safe, and then one day, if you're lucky, you drop it all and realize you can fly. I wasn't the woman Richard married. I wasn't even the woman who walked away. I had become someone new, not because of age, but because of courage. A local high school invited me to speak. They had heard about the flower shop, my story, the way women in town whispered about that second chance lady. I stood in front of 50 teenage girls and told them the truth. I was once afraid to wear red lipstick, I began. Not because I didn't love it, but because someone told me I didn't deserve to feel beautiful anymore. They listened, eyes wide. I told them about the small steps, the whispered dreams, the garden. I told them about how it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. And when I finished, a girl no older than 16 raised her hand and said, "Do you still wear the lipstick?" I laughed. "Every day." They clapped. I cried, and I knew I was no longer invisible. One morning, I received a letter at the shop. It was from a woman in another town. She had read about me in a local blog. A customer had written about my story and posted it online. The letter said, "You reminded me that there's life after betrayal, that I'm not just a wife or a mother. I'm me, and I've decided to go back to school. At 58. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to begin." I held the letter to my chest and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." Adam and I grew older, but never apart. He held my hand through everything, through new wrinkles and old wounds, through laughter and slow mornings, through the passing seasons of our love. One night, as we sat on our porch wrapped in blankets, he said, "You know, I used to think love was about finding the perfect person. Now I know. It's about choosing someone again and again, even after the world has bruised them." I leaned on his shoulder. "I'm glad you chose me," I whispered. He smiled. "No, Evelyn, I saw you, and I knew you were the choice I was waiting for." If you're listening to my story right now, if you feel forgotten, unseen, discarded, please remember, you are not too old, you are not too late, and you are certainly not done. Sometimes life begins after everyone else thinks it's over. Sometimes your glow comes not in your 20s, but in your 60s. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not to hurt the one who broke you, but to heal so beautifully they wouldn't recognize the woman who rose from the ashes. This was my story, and maybe it's yours too.